What's going on, NEM crew? Welcome back to another video. Today we're talking about money. Specifically, we're talking about the restoration and build costs that went into my Datsun 280Z build. So let's just dive right in and strap in. It's going to be a lot of talking, but hopefully we can run through it fairly quick. So today is a fairly rainy day, and I figured I might as well take this opportunity to go through the costs that I incurred doing the restoration and the modifications so far on my Datsun 280Z. So I got a bunch of pages here. I actually took a bunch of time. The Datsun build's been going on for about 4 or 5 years, so I had to go back super far. I had to go through and find a bunch of costs because I don't remember everything, and to that point some of the costs on here are estimated, so they might not be exact. So the figure that we come up with at the end isn't 100%, but it'll be very close. And before I started doing this, I actually estimated that the cost of the car, with all the modifications, with all the money that I spent to restore the car, I figured I'd probably be just over around $30,000, and that's Canadian. And I was quite shocked actually to see what the total number was. So let's just dive right in. I've split it up into a couple different parts, and like I just mentioned, we will include the cost of the car, of the Datsun, into this as well. We'll break it down into the total cost of the restoration and the modifications, and then we'll do kind of like a total with the actual cost of the car. So bear with me here. I'm gonna try not to rummage through these papers while I'm talking. So just bear with me, and hopefully you guys will find this interesting. And I think it goes fairly well with the previous video about the walk around that we did on the Datsun, kind of summarizing all the work that's been done over the 4 or 5 years that I've owned it, to right now where it pretty much sits. Now that being said, the Datsun build is not done, but I figured the majority of the major work of the car is pretty much good to go. So it's perfect. So it all ties together. Let's go through the list. So I'm going to start with the interior of the car. I'm not breaking it down into the restoration costs and the modification costs. It's going to be all kind of tied together. And I'm not going to be going through every single cost. We'd be here for years. So we're just going to go through some of the key points, and then we'll give like an overall cost to that specific section. So let's go to the interior section. We'll start with the most notable things in the interior, like the seats, the brackets. That cost was about $1,800. Then we have the cost to do more of the restoration portion of things. So that was like the not the steering wheel, the gauges, the dash work, the carpet kit. That came around probably about $600. And then we have like the steering wheel hub, all that stuff, which was roughly around another $480. So, and then we have some miscellaneous interior stuff that was probably roughly around another $150 to $200. So bottom line, total cost of the interior, including again seats, all the restoration stuff, was around $3,440. And again, these aren't going to be exact numbers because there was some estimations that took place. The interior, I would say, was one of the more budget areas. But let's move on to the exterior. So with the exterior, I mean, you guys probably can tell from the previous video, the walk around, that there's not really much that's been done to the exterior of the car, but the biggest expenses come down to the wheels, the tires, the front bumpers, and the grille. Those are the main key points, and we do have some aftermarket headlights on here as well. The wheels were about $1,500 with shipping, duties, taxes, all that stuff. And those are 1552 Formula TRs. We have a skillered front grille on there that was about $500. The front and rear bumpers were about $1,600 dollars. Tires were about just over 500, and the headlights were about 250. So that brings us to a grand total for the exterior of $4,479 or $4,480. So the exterior, though it doesn't seem like there was much, but once you start diving into wheels, tires, and those bumpers took a pretty big chunk out of the total amount here. That's going to be it for the exterior. We'll move on to the suspension and brake upgrades. That's where the biggest chunk of the money went. So if you don't know, we have Techno Toy Tuning front suspension, including coilovers, including a big brake kit, including lower control arms, tension control rods. Pretty much everything in the front end is Techno Toy Tuning. There is a Willwood brake kit. The rear end of the car has Techno Toy Tuning. It's got their rear end conversion, so we actually have a rear end from a Nissan 300ZX. So it's got the disc brake conversion as well as Techno Toy Tuning coilovers, all the bracketry, the lower control arms, all that fun stuff. So we'll go into the individual pieces of that in terms of the costs. So the Nissan 300ZX subframes, I actually had to buy front and rear because that's just how they came, was $1,400. The Techno Toy Tuning rear conversion kit with all the brackets, all the fun stuff, the adjusted CV axle shafts, so they would fit the width of the car, with the lower control arms, that was $4,660. And then the front coilovers with the big brake kit with 5 lug hubs to match what was going to be going on in the rear with the 300ZX subframe. The lower control arms, trans cross member, all that was $4,850. And a lot of the stuff that you don't really see or you might not think would be a fairly expensive cost in terms of doing this whole conversion. We had to buy upgraded rear rotors. Well, not really upgraded, but we had to buy new rear rotors because they were all mangled. We had to get a custom drive shaft made. Rear rotors were about $100 each, 200. Drive shaft ended up being like almost $700. And then there was a bunch of fab work to make the exhaust work. Then the exhaust is kind of a little bit different, but it's still kind of in regards to the suspension work, because if I didn't do the suspension work, I wouldn't have to do the fab work on the exhaust. And then there's also some suspension setup that we had a shop take care of. So that was about $1,600. So that was a pretty big expense there. So the total amount for the suspension and brake upgrades was a whopping $13,550. Holy crap. That shocked me a little bit. So that was a pretty big chunk of the build, and realistically, the restoration portion of the build didn't really cost too much. Thinking about it now, the big chunk came down to, realistically, more recently, front and rear suspension and brake upgrades, the LSD conversion, and then the seats as well. So just to note, we also did use the limited slip differential out of the Nissan 300ZX, and that Techno Toy Tuning rear end conversion allowed us to utilize that differential. Moving on to exhaust, we have a Greddy header, and I think it's like a Greddy teamed up with another team. I can't remember what, or another company. I can't remember what they're called, but it's a Greddy header, which was $600. And then we have a Fujitsu Legalis R exhaust system, which I believe I got a pretty, I don't know if it was on sale, but ended up being, I think, $1,200, something like that. So total amount for the exhaust was about $1,800. And again, the fab work was tied into the suspension and brakes upgrade, because again, we wouldn't have to really do that unless we did that the suspension and brake upgrade in the rear end. Lastly, there's not much more. It's a bunch of miscellaneous stuff. So like gaskets, paints, things like that. The engine bay has been painted, sandblasted. So there's a bunch of things that you don't really think is going to end up being a lot, but they do end up adding up. Let me see here. The miscellaneous stuff was about $1,900, just over $1,900. And again, that is a wide range of just little things like clamps, maybe little sensors here and there. Yeah, anything like that. So it was ended up being quite a bit more than I thought. But lastly, actually, I thought that we were going to finish off the miscellaneous stuff, but we're going to move on to engine. So the engine is stock, but this is a Nissan 280 or a Datsun 280ZX motor, so it's the L28E. So I bought a used engine and transmission, manual 5-speed for $700. We have a coil radiator in here, which was I think $600, and then we did a cylinder head rebuild, which was $400, and then we did like the alternator starter rebuild, which is about $250 to $300. Then there's a bunch of other miscellaneous things like as gaskets, things like that, fluids, oil filter, distributor stuff, like the ignition wires. So a bunch of small things. I didn't want to go through a whole list. So at the end of the day, the engine cost was $3,363. So engine work was actually one of the smallest expenses, and I've had no issues with the engine. So everything's been good. But a grand total, so for adding everything together, the build costs so far have been, you ready for it? $29,224. So that's the cost, again, for everything that just parts related. Some labor in there in terms of the fab work, but most of the work has been done by myself. So that saved us quite a bit of money. I couldn't imagine what that total would be if we had to put labor in here. It would be absolutely crazy. So that saved a bunch of money. And now to tie it all together, the cost of the car, I bought this, I think my 78 Datsun 280Z, I think it's 5 years now. It might just be over the 4-year mark, but I think it's 5 years. And I bought it for $8,000. It was running driving condition. It was in pretty far away from me, so I had to ship it. So shipping costs with registration, taxes, safety, all the stuff to get it on the road driving was about another $1,750. So again, the total cost of the car to get it registered driving with all the modifications, the restoration, is I can't believe it's actually this number, $38,974. Shit, that's a lot. When I bought the car, I didn't think I'd be putting this much money into it, but it's crazy to see over, a long period of time how quickly, the amounts just can rack up. So we're at almost $40,000 for this car now. I wouldn't go back and change anything, but it's crazy now seeing how much money, it costs to, get a car where you want it. And again, the build's not done. I mean, there's still a few minor things that I do want to do, but that's crazy to me. Now, like I said, this build has been going on for like four years. So that money spread out over 4 years is like $8,000, I think between $7,000 and $8,000 a year. So I mean, if you're slowly setting aside some money, if you're working a day job like I do, it can definitely be feasible, but that's crazy. I know the cost of these cars too now are going up, especially depending on where you live, but that's awesome. It's awesome that I have the car. It's awesome that I was able to do the build, but looking at these numbers, probably almost $10,000 more than what I was thinking. And I think it's just because all those like little things that you don't really think of. And when I first got the car, there's issues with the engine. So I was like, oh, I gotta go buy an engine. And you're like, those costs, you're just like, oh, you have to do it, right? You don't have an engine, you don't have a car. So it's been an amazing experience, but cost me about $40,000. That's crazy. that's gonna be it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you have any questions about any of the specifics that I mentioned, or if maybe you think there's anything that I left out, because there's been so much that I've done over the years and you guys have been following the build, the channel, maybe I missed something, and it very plausible I could. It took me quite some time to actually go through and jot down and make sure I was kind of on top of all these numbers, but that's gonna be it for this video. Subscribe if you guys want to see more. Make sure you hit the notification bell. We'll have a couple more videos coming out very soon. Peace out and stay classy, crew.